The Black Cat is one of Poe's most beguiling and disturbing tales, and it has attracted a great deal of critical analysis. There are numerous ways to approach this story, so in order to maintain a semblance of clarity, this analysis will be divided into sections relating to different themes, theories, and frameworks of analysis. The unreliable narrator. One of the most salient things about the tale is the fact that readers cannot trust the narrator. He speaks before he is to be put to death, yet his tone is deceptively calm. He speaks of things that are not sane in the tone of a sane person. He admits that he does not understand the things that have happened, but he thinks that perhaps someone else can. He rationalizes all the things he does but shows no remorse or understanding of his moral degeneration. The tale he narrates shows him lapsing into evil because of his divided nature, turning against reality, rationality, and anyone outside of his own self. As Ed Piacentino notes, the narrator would like the reader to regard him in his present state as calm and rational, a character presumably with self-control, but he is actually excitable and illogical. Alcohol. Regardless of the narrator's moral issues or inclination toward perverseness, he is clearly an alcoholic, and that inability to control his drink exacerbates his thoughts and actions. Alcohol is a form of self-destruction for him, but it is a form he welcomes. As critic Magdalene Wing-Shiki writes, the jouissance of alcohol allows the subject to live in his own world and expel the other, cat, wife, law, in the self. Poe invites his readers to see that the alcohol has allowed the drive subject to push all identifications aside and enjoy a new being. Perverseness. The narrator's excuse for his behavior is the spirit of perverseness, or doing something evil simply because it is evil. However, we cannot take him at his word, and it is more likely that his own psychology is to blame. As James Gargano explains, the way the incidents are arranged in the tale suggests development over time as well as a gradually enfeebling of his moral nature under the impact of increasing self-indulgence. The narrator also tries to explain away his deeds and rationalize them, which complicates his defense. He is immersed in and infatuated by evil and deliberately chooses to ignore the moral implications of his behavior. He embraces evil more and more, exonerates himself, and often rejects obvious moral explanations in favor of either spurious or ingenious rationalizations to admissions of his inability to determine the cause and effect relationship between the events of his life. The cat as symbol. At the beginning of the tale, James Gargano explains, the cat is a neutral figure. It is docile, like the narrator and his wife. However, as the narrator turns violent, the cat turns aggressive, it then turns into an innocent victim, and finally comes back to haunt him as a reincarnation. It is to be understood symbolically, it is the narrator's own multiple nature. Once the total self is outraged, the subterranean king, Pluto, tyrannically exacts his vengeance. When the narrator cuts the cat's eye out, the mutilation represents the narrator's compulsive attack upon himself and a partial obliteration of his vision of good. The aftermath is a deeper deadening of his moral self. He becomes more stubborn and less insightful, he is now ready to violate himself in a more complete manner. The demonic. Poe studied demonology, interested in the intersection between human destiny and demonic power. In his study on this topic, Kentel Ljungqvist looks into how Poe saw the demonic impulse as linked with poetic inspiration. Possession in both cases was a morally ambiguous experience, both elevating and terrifying. Ecstasy and dread are present in equal parts in this inward mental state. The Black Cat is a tale that explores demonic force, symbolized by the cat itself. Not only were cats often associated with dark powers, but there are also other factors that support this claim based on the scholarship of the demonic. First, demons brought about a feeling of oppression, or a heavy weight that could hamper breathing, which the narrator complains of. Second, the demon can create a feeling of being frozen or paralyzed, which is also an issue for the narrator. And third, nightmares bring feelings of demonic dread, the narrator suffers from these. Tellingly, his sensation cannot be defined easily because it is a mixture of elevation and horror. He professes agony over his degradation, but significantly, his sense also thrill to a height of emotion never before experienced. The cat is, then, a symbol of the narrator's demonic possession. He often comments on how smart it is, and he also seems to think it is sapping his energy that his moral vitality steadily diminishes and is absorbed by the cat. The cat begins as a model of domestic virtue, but as the narrator falls apart mentally, the transformation from domestic house cat to fiendish demon coincides with the narrator's moral deterioration. The cat appears in places that are problems for the narrator, the house that burned down after his act of violence and a bar. The cat is thus an inextricable part of the narrator's psychology and also a symbolic reminder of his destined punishment. The cat is a powerful entity that grows even more powerful as the narrator's power and autonomy wane, and ultimately, these spectral appearances reflect a residue of conscience. The grotesque. Critics see the grotesque as a mixture of the normal, the abnormal, the archaic, the modern, the fearful, the horrible, the witty, the burlesque, the singular, the strange, and the mystical. Poe uses the grotesque in his work and pushes it into the excessive, but by his doing so in The Black Cat and Other Tales, as Merida Nadeau writes, the grotesque proves to be a source of both fear and laughter. Some of the details in the story undermine the solemnity of the narrator's confession, as do some of the unbelievable and fantastical elements. Elements of the grotesque in the tale also include uncanniness, an idea expostulated by Freud, repetition, the double, the claim to perverseness, and the fixation on sight. For Freud, losing an eye was linked with castration, so for the narrator, who was perhaps overly concerned with his own masculinity, fixation on the animal's missing eye could be telling. Masculinity. The narrator seems to resort to bursts of hyper-masculine behavior to cover his more feminine behavior. Critics Moreland and Rodriguez explain, he is constantly undermined by his impulsive, irrational temperament, a trait not only common to adolescent boys but also one stereotypically attributed to women. His violent outbursts are not expressions of machismo but are rather futile attempts to eradicate the feminine traits which were always latent in his personality, and are only now coming to the surface. They suggest that Poe had a subtle message for his male readers. Men's grip on sanity and masculine identity is more slippery than they might think, that at their most vulnerable moment a demonic thief in the night might pull back the curtains of their minds and deprive them of what they treasure most, their vaunted supremacy. Motive and meaning. The readers may want to determine the reason for the narrator's actions. As Joseph Stark argues, there might not be a sufficient reason at all. The story can be seen to uphold the mysterious nature of the human will in a time dominated by intellectual rationalism. There are diverse clues in the text that give rise to numerous motives, all of which seem to be presented with equal weight to readers. First, Stark notes that the most straightforward reading would locate the narrator's behavior in human depravity, but this fails to acknowledge the unreliability of the story's narrator as well as the insufficiency of the answer. We should be cautious of any explanation that the narrator himself gives, and furthermore, he himself offers no ultimate explanation for the cause behind the perversity. Another motive is alcoholism, but this does not account for what drove him to alcohol in the first place or the fact that some of his crimes take place when he is not drunk. A third explanation is the psychobiography of the narrator, particularly his effeminacy, but the excesses in which the narrator engages cannot be explained through this. Ultimately, then, there is no clear explanation. The moral of the tale, if there is one, may be more a statement on the insufficiency of human reason than the nature of the human will. No one, it may be inferred, is so distinct from either the murderous tendencies of the narrator or from his inability adequately to explain such tendencies.